I'm so pleased, Larry Elder.
Thank you. We'll see if you feel the same way in about a half hour. Thank you so much. I want to thank the San Fernando Valley Republican Club for inviting me. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? Gorgeous. I got into talk radio quite by accident. I was living and working in Cleveland, and I wrote an op-ed piece for the newspaper. And in the op-ed piece, I said, government's too big, we're taxed too much, we're regulated too much. Racism is no longer a major problem in America anymore. We need to embrace, take responsibility. This is the best country in the whole world. Much of the 7 billion people in the world want to come here, that sort of thing. I got a phone call from a radio station. Can you come on and talk about your article? So I agreed to come on. I was on for an hour, and I was called Uncle Tom, bootlicking Uncle Tom, racist, shuffling bootlicking Uncle Tom, sugarcane Negro, Oreo, as in brown on the outside, white on the inside, coconut, same concept, the Antichrist, and one guy called and he wanted to hurt, to wound, to scold. He said, Republican. A man can only take so much. So I get home after doing this hour on radio, and it was really just god-awful. Every other caller was black, and I was called all these awful names. Phone rings, and it's the station manager. Heard you today. You were amazing. I was. Oh, my goodness, you were funny. You spoke well. You took controversial issues. You defended them without losing your sense of humor. Have you ever thought about doing talk radio? And I said, no. He said, I've got a guy going on vacation in about a week. I want you to sit in for him. Would you do that? I said, thank you, no. He said, why? I said, I just don't really like yelling at people and being yelled at, and that seems to me to be what the whole medium is all about. He said, well, it's a little more than that. Are you married? At the time I was. He said, go home to your wife, talk this over, and call me back tomorrow because I think you might change your mind. I said, I'll talk to her, but I doubt that I'll change my mind. I go home, I mentioned it to Cindy. She says, well, what do you think about talk radio? I said, what I think of talk radio is shallow, glib, and stupid. She said, it is. You'd be good at it. Which gives you an idea of what happened to that marriage. Every now and then I'm reminded of how great this country is and why I'm so optimistic. The other day I'm at a gas station. I pull up in my late model car given to me by my... They put in $5 of regular and they rumble away. And as they're rumbling away, I say to myself, just think, those two dudes owe me reparations. Is this a great country or what? If Martin Luther King, sitting in a jail cell in Birmingham, when he wrote that letter, had been told by some angel, Martin, you're going to sacrifice your life. Let me give you a deal, though. In about 40, 50 years, there'll be a black president. He'll be reelected. There'll be back-to-back black secretaries of state. The CEO of McDonald's will be a black man. The black population, if it were a separate country, would be the 15th wealthiest country in the world. He'd take that deal. He'd take that deal. And yet we're still talking about whether or not racism is still a major problem in America. Are you kidding me? Are you smoking something? All these men and women who fought and died to get us to where we are right now, it is easier now for a black kid to get into a college or university because of affirmative action. A black college-educated couple compared to a white college-educated couple where both work, the black couple earns more money than the white couple. And yet we're told that racism remains a major problem in America. Pierce Morgan and I, as you know, had a bit of a dispute. We were talking about the Sandy Hook tragedy, and I said, of course it's tragic, but the face of gun violence in America is not some white kid in the suburbs. It's that 15-year-old girl who performed at Obama's inauguration. It's a 7-year-old Latina who was shot, one of 4 or 5 people shot in about an hour in Chicago last year in May. We're supposed to fear that somebody like George Zimmerman is tracking down black people and looking over our shoulder at being racially profiled. Of the homicides in this country, half of them were black victims. 96% of the black victims had a black perpetrator. The fact of the matter is that racism is no longer a major problem in America anymore. The biggest social problem in this country is the percentage of kids who are born without fathers in the home. Far and away. Nothing else is even close. President Obama gave a speech at Morehouse, and he said, a kid growing up without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor, 9 times more likely to drop out of high school, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. I gave that number at a speech one time. Someone raised his hand and said, Larry, you mean you're optimistic that Obama will someday end up in jail? So that's not the point. This is what's going on here. In 1960, 5% of firstborn children were born outside of wedlock. I'm talking about 5% of all children. Right now, that number is 43%. In 1965, Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote a book called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. In it, he argued that at 25% out of wedlock birth rate, the black community was facing a meltdown, and we needed to get our handles around this ASAP. He said there was going to be a direct relationship between that and crime, that and dropouts, that and drug dependency. You name your social problem, a direct relationship between that. Fast forward. 75% of black kids today are born outside of wedlock. 85% at some point will be living in a home without a father. 50% of Hispanic kids outside of wedlock. 35% of white kids, 10 percentage points higher than when he wrote that alarmist book. Now, clearly we're less racist now than we were in 1965. You cannot blame racism. How can it possibly be racism? It's public policies. Lyndon Johnson launched the so-called War on Poverty, and he literally sent welfare workers door to door to knock on doors. I was there, advising women of their rights to welfare, provided there was no man in the house. Within 3 years, welfare increased 110%. You add that on top of what FDR did, who's another icon of the Democratic Party. Minimum wage alone is estimated to have cost 500,000 jobs, black jobs. Minimum wage was enacted in 1938. It was 25 cents an hour. At the time, a black teenager was more likely to be employed than a white teenager for obvious reasons. They'd work for less money. Now you're telling an employer who's inclined to be racist, you can't pay this guy fair market value, you got to pay up to here. Well, up to here, you got a lot of white people willing to do that. So if I'm a racist and I'm now forced to pay for something I don't want, I can pay for a white guy. 500,000 black people are estimated to have lost their jobs alone because of minimum wage, alone. And then we talk about direct payments that FDR gave to farmers. Many of these farmers had sharecroppers and had tenant farmers. They got nothing. Millions of people are estimated to have lost their jobs as a result of this. So you add up what FDR did to what LBJ did, and this is a direct assault on the black family, and the black family survived slavery, survived Jim Crow, but did not survive the welfare state. That's what's going on here. It's just so much about personal responsibility and hard work, isn't it? I wrote a book about my father, my 4th book. It's called Dear Father, Dear Son. My father was a tough guy, and my brothers and I could not stand the SOB growing up. I thought he was cruel. I thought he was harsh. I thought he punished us too quickly. I thought he angered too easily. I'm 15 years old. My father and I have this furious fight, and we don't speak for 10 years. And I mean we don't speak for 10 years. Now I'm 25 years old. I'm beginning to have difficulty sleeping, and I think it might have something to do with the fact that I've never really told my father how I felt about him. I'm living and working in Cleveland at the time, even though I'm born and raised here in LA. My father had a little cafe, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So I called my secretary and I said, cancel all my appointments for the next 3 days. I'm going to LA. I didn't even call my mom and my dad and tell them I was coming. I walk into the restaurant at 1:30. We close at 2:30. I said, Dad, I want to talk to you. He said, fine, wait an hour, we'll talk. I had my bags with me. He comes over, he says, should I put the bags in the back? No, Dad, I'm only going to be here about 10, 15 minutes and then I'll be gone. We sat on 2 stools for 8 hours. And from the time we sat there until the time we quit, this man transformed in front of my eyes from this SOB to this kind, caring, sensitive guy who was there all the time. I just didn't appreciate it. I said I was going to be calm. I was going to talk about all the things my father said and did to me that bothered me, and I would be calm. So my dad and I sat down, and I went off for 15 minutes. You know how I can be. And I told him about the time he spanked me in front of my cousin Elaine, about the time that he whipped my brother and me with the telephone cord when we were dripping wet coming out of the bathtub, and the time he got his strap, and the time he got this, and the time he did that. And when I was done, my father said, "That it?" I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "I was afraid of my daddy too." My father never used the word daddy. There was kind of a no-fly zone over discussing my father's background in our house. I knew he was an only child, and I knew he was from the South, and I knew that he didn't know his father, sort of, kind of, but he never really talked about it, and no one ever talked about it, and since we didn't like him anyway, I didn't care. I said, "You were afraid of your daddy?" And he said, "The name Elder is not the name of his biological father. He never met his biological father, doesn't know who he is, never saw him. The name Elder was one of his mother's boyfriends who was in his life the longest. My father comes home from school at the age of 13, has a quarrel with the mother's boyfriend, not Elder, he had long since left. The mother sides with the boyfriend, throws my father out of the house at 13 years old, never to return. We're talking about a black kid, Athens, Georgia, a year or two before the beginning of the Great Depression, never to return. My father goes to a series of Dickensian kinds of jobs, goes next door, goes over here, ultimately gets a job as kind of taking care of the lawn, and then he gets a promotion to being a cook. He becomes a Pullman porter. They were the largest private employers of blacks in those days. And my father then traveled all around the country and came out to California and thought it was so sunny and people seemed to be so friendly, and kind of made a mental note that maybe someday I may relocate to Los Angeles. Pearl Harbor. My dad joins the Marines. "Dad, why did you join the Marines?" "I loved the uniforms and I liked the action." They made him a cook. He was on the island of Guam when the bombs fell. My father then goes back to Chattanooga, where he had married my mom, goes to an unemployment office to get a job. And the lady says, "I'm sorry, sir, you walked through the wrong door." My father goes out to the hall, sees colored only, goes through that door to the very same woman who sent him out. My father comes home to my mother and says, "Ola, this is bull. I'm going to Los Angeles. I'm going to get me a job as a cook." He comes out here and goes from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, and they all tell him the same thing: "I'm sorry, you have no references." In the South, when he went from restaurant to restaurant to get a job, "I'm sorry, we don't hire niggers." Out here, "I'm sorry, you have no references." Same result, but done in a much more kind, gentle way. My father goes to an unemployment office, only one door this time, and the lady says, "I have nothing for you." My father says, "What time do you open?" She says, 8:30. "What time do you close?" She said, 5. My dad said, "I'll be here at 8:30. I'll be here till 5 until I find something." He sat in a chair for a day and a half. Lady calls him up. She says, "I got something. Don't think you're going to want it." He says, "What is it?" She says, "It's a job with Nabisco cleaning toilets." Of course I want it. My dad worked at that job for 10 years, took a second full-time job as a janitor with Barbara Ann Bread, cooked for a family on the weekend, and went to school to get his GED because, as I said, he left home when he was 13. I never saw anybody work that hard. He was tired. He was irritable. You try 4.5 hours for a couple of decades, every single day, 7 days a week, and see what kind of mood you're in when you have 3 rambunctious boys coming home. And I told my father, "How did you do that? Why aren't you angry? Why aren't you mad?" And he looked at me like I was crazy. What kind of question is that? Why would I be mad? Look at the country right now, Larry. You look at what you and your brothers have done. Sky's the limit right now. I wish I could trade places with you. He said, "Hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. And no matter how hard you work, bad things are going to happen to you. When those bad things happen, how you respond to those bad things will let us know whether or not we raised a man." To which I would always say, "Dad, not too much pressure." My mother, as you know, was on my show every Friday. My mother was a Democrat, my dad Republican. And they would have fights around the kitchen table, and when I was younger, I sided with my mom, as all boys do. And then when I got older and got into life, I began siding with my dad. And it began to irritate my mom a little bit. And my mother always believed in the same thing. She believed in education. My mother had 1 year of college, which for a black woman is like having a PhD. from the South. And she always told us it's all about education, all about hard work, all about personal responsibility, all about being accountable. My mother, as you know, was pretty tough. I was practicing law when the hostages were taken. And I was with a bunch of other lawyers. We're all talking about what we ought to do about this horrible problem. I said, I know what my mom would do. And they said, what? I said, she'd give them 48 hours, she'd bomb the hell out of them. I said, oh, nobody's mother would say that. I said, you don't know my mother. I'm in Ohio working, my mom's in LA, a bunch of guys in my office, we pick up the phone. I said, watch. I call my mom. I said, Mom, have you been following this hostage scandal? She said, oh yeah. I said, what would you do about it? I hang up. The lawyer said, well, did she say she'd give him 48 hours? I said, no. They said, I told you. I said, no, my mom's mellowing. She'd give him 72. In the article, I talked about the size of government and what the problems are. At all three levels of government in 1900, federal, state, and local, the government took 7% of our money. 7%. Today, at all three levels of government now takes almost half of our money. Half. When the Constitution was written, the Founding Fathers assumed very limited, narrow responsibilities of government. There was no federal income tax. For people that believe in a living, breathing document, ask yourself this question. If you think that the Founding Fathers intended for there to be a Social Security, a Medicare, a Medicaid, a FEMA, fill in the blank, why was there no income tax to pay for it? Because they didn't assume we were going to do that. They thought that the limited government duties would be done by duties and tariffs, and that would be it. And now we've grown government, we've destroyed families. This meltdown that we just now had with real estate on the Wall Street, that was all about government. Freddie and Fannie, the Community Reinvestment Act, believing that anybody who can fog up a mirror and has a pulse deserves to have a home. And as a result, all these loans were made, which distorted the entire housing market. It was an affirmative action recession. These are all government things. And the good news is that we know it works. 1996, over the objections of people like John Lewis and almost all the Democratic Party, certainly all the blacks, Bill Clinton signed the Welfare Reform Act of 1996 after twice vetoing it, after Karl Rove said, if you want to get reelected, you need to sign this because 90% of America is behind it. He signed it. What happened? Welfare rolls declined by 50%, far more steeply than anybody ever imagined. There was no corresponding increase in abortion. A bunch of able-bodied people and able-minded people got off the couch and went into the job market. Hello. We know it works. When I was in high school, we read this poem. And the poem, I think, just says a lot about how people feel about this country, and my mom's reaction to it, to me, tells us a lot about what we need to do to turn this country around. The poem goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. Well, I was pissed. Class was pissed. Teacher was pissed. Everybody was pissed. I come home. I said, Mom, we read a poem in class. I want to get your reaction to it. She says, what is it? Stirring a big pot of greens. I'll never forget it in the kitchen. I said, it goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, but he was no whit bigger. And so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. My mother took the spoon out of the pot, wrapped it on the side, and she said, Larry, what a damn shame he let something so trivial spoil his vacation. Let me just end with this, and then we'll take some questions. I know you want to hear about Syria and other things. I was doing a fundraiser at a grocery store in the Valley, and this guy comes up to me, and he starts telling me the jokes. And one was funnier than the other. Evan, he was as funny as you are. And he tells me this joke, and each one is funnier than the other, and I didn't know whether or not I should laugh. Guy goes to a bar, sees this man sprawled out on the floor. He picks him up, puts him on the stool. The guy falls back on the floor. says to the bartender, clearly this man is drunk, give me his address, I'll take him home. Bartender gives the guy the address. He drags the guy to the car, he falls in the street, puts him in the car, he rolls out of the door, closes the door, gets the guy to this guy's house, takes him up the guy's stairs, he falls down the stairs, brings him back up to the guy's house, leans up against the house, pushes the doorbell, guy's wife comes to the door and says, "Where's his wheelchair?" Guy who told me that joke was a triple amputee. I'm not making this up. He came up, someone pushed him up in his wheelchair. He told me amputee joke after amputee joke. Each one was funnier than the other one. I didn't know if I should laugh or not. And that one was just killing me. I just started cracking up. And I said, "What?" And he just said, "It's all about attitude." Now, I don't know whether he was Republican or Democrat, but once I was watching a convention, political convention, with a woman who's from Iran. And after a while, she turns to me and she says, "Laddie, what is the difference between a Republican and a Democrat?" Now, this is somebody who doesn't know anything at all about politics. You can't give her a long-winded explanation, talk about the Constitution, living, breathing versus contract. And I said, well, Democrats believe the system is rigged, and Republicans believe hard work wins. And that is... And I said that about 15, 20 years ago, and frankly, I can't really improve upon that. That, to me, is the difference. One party accepts responsibility. One party recognizes that life isn't fair. And one party recognizes that it's all about hard work and accountability and trying to turn it around yourself. And the other party thinks of itself as a victim and wants you to think of yourself as a victim. And every victocrat needs a victimizer. And as a result, the victimizer becomes racism, sexism, fill in your favorite ism. Martin Luther King said, "In our thirst for freedom, we must take care not to drink from the cup of bitterness and hatred." Thank you very much for having me. I'm Larry Elder. Thank you. Thank you.
If you'd like to ask a question, there's a microphone up here. If you'd like to ask a question, come up here to the front right of the room, up to the front of the room on the right side. And Val Symbol is going to man this microphone, and you'll be able to ask a question. If you want to make a statement, Val's going to pull it right away from your mouth. So just ask your question so that we can hear from Larry. Thank you.
Hi, Larry.
I bet you didn't know where I was going with that wheelchair joke, right? Yeah. A true story. It's an absolute true story.
I'm Bobby
Yeah.
Fiedler, and I want you to know I have been an immense fan of yours for as long as I can remember. I have a kind of a personal question in the sense that I would like to know if you have a relationship with Thomas Sowell, and if so, what is that like?
The question was, do I have a relationship with Tom Sowell? Well, both of us are heterosexual. I know that's not what you meant.
Damn.
Let me tell you, Tom Sowell, to me, is the Sandy Koufax of sort of my ideology. And I've always been a fan of his ever since I was 15, 16 years old when I first saw him on Firing Line, The Buckley Show. And he came out and he blasted affirmative action, which I hadn't heard anybody criticize. It just seemed to me fair. You know, all of a sudden we're free and now you want us to compete. It just seemed fair that there ought to be a certain kind of thumb on the scale for minorities for a while. It just seemed fair. And I heard him say it wasn't fair. And he said this with passion and with calmness and persuasiveness, and I became a hero from that point. So fast forward, I'm now a talk show host. C-SPAN came in and they wanted to broadcast my show. At the time it was 4 hours long, and they put it on the entire show 4 hours live. So anybody could watch the show live. I get a letter. "Dear Larry, my wife and I saw you for 4 hours. We watched the entire thing. You articulated the principles of limited government and personal responsibility as effectively as I've ever seen anybody articulate. Call myself a new fan. Sincerely yours, Tom Sowell." And I was then invited to come spend the weekend with him, and I spent a weekend with him just hanging out. He's an amazing photographer, by the way. Go online, look at some of his stuff. It is amazing. And he said to me, "Larry, do you think we're doing any good?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Do you think it's working?" I said, "What?" He said, the stuff we're putting out. And it just struck me that he'd been working this hard all these years and he still was so disappointed that things weren't moving better. And he said, if I had to do it all over again, I would have been a photographer. I said, please. There are a lot of good photographers. David Mamet has referred to you as America's greatest living philosopher. How many people have said that about photographers?
Larry, just a time check. We just have maybe 5 minutes. So
you want a radio host not to speak very long? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, they've been very cordial with the room here.
I'll pull out the race card in a minute. You know I will. You didn't shut down the white speakers. There was no clock on the white speakers.
So this line is probably about it of the speakers. And
you know, when Oprah Winfrey walks into a store in Switzerland and she can buy a $38,000 bag and she's a billionaire, she's probably got more issues than some clerk. Unreal.
Hello, Larry.
I have no patience with middle-class, rich, white, black people bitching and moaning about racism. You know, they got their education, they got their house, they got their car, and now they want more stuff, and they're trying to give everybody else who needs to have the image and the impression of hard work and accountability, you're trying to give everybody else the impression that there's something out there holding them back. If you're some black kid and you have no dad in the house, and you're watching Oprah tell you that some lady has discriminated against her because she and I'm Oprah, what hope do I have? I'm not a billionaireess. And Oprah's whining about racism. Do you have any idea what damage people are doing? Jesse Jackson goes to Decatur, Illinois, a few years ago when some black kids were kicked out for fighting. And he accuses the Decatur School Board of racism. Turns out these kids had collectively missed about 400 days of school. They were gang-related. They were thugs. So Jesse Jackson goes there, files a lawsuit. The lawsuit's tossed out. But from that point on, Decatur students were telling their teachers, leave me alone, I'm going to call Jesse. This is the real world damage these people are doing. I'm sorry. I got off.
Hello, Larry.
Medication just kicked in.
Jews vote consistently in excess of 73% Democrat.
Right.
Since Jewish values superimpose almost perfectly with the Republican conservative values, why doesn't the GOP/Tea Party/Libertarians reach out more aggressively to the Jewish community, the reform movement in particular?
Well, it's a big problem, isn't it? Reaching out also requires reaching back. Whenever people talk to me about why Republicans aren't reaching out to this, that, and the other, you also have to be receptive to the message. And you can't make somebody receptive unless they're willing to at least listen. Jews are fascinating because they're the only ethnic group where, as you get more and more money, they retain their allegiance to the Democratic Party. Most people, blacks, Catholics, you name the group, once they get more money, they typically vote more Republican. Not Jews, only one. And I've thought a lot about why. And I think the reason is Jews have such empathy. They want to be liked. They don't want people to dislike them. They don't want people to think of them as greedy, as selfish. And so, in my opinion, logic kind of goes out the door. And unlike in business and other areas where you find hard work, accountability, exacting reason, all of a sudden emotion kicks in, and that's what happens. And it's just the most bizarre thing. It's almost like a blind spot. You tell me what it is. I don't know. Every single thing about the way Jews have become successful, you would think would track with the Republican Party. Hard work, accountability. Race-based preferences, are you kidding me? They were used to keep Jews out of universities. And they're in the party that supports race-based preferences. It makes no sense. Gun control? Can you imagine if a handful of Jews had some firearms back in the day? How things would have turned out? Taxes?
What about Asians?
You tell me.
You couldn't say the same thing about Asians. That's not my question, but Asians, the same thing?
Well, Asians, I know you didn't mean this, but Asians mess up the whole thing, don't they? Because once you start talking about underrepresented minority, and then you find out that Asians are more likely to have their loan applications accepted than a white person, you have to ask yourself, are these bankers anti-white? They mess everything up. And, when you look at the Japanese, there were laws in California that forbade Japanese from owning farmland. The first ethnic group to be excluded from immigration laws were Chinese. So they've had issues as well. But hard work, accountability, family, values, those kinds of things, and all of a sudden, a Japanese American and a Chinese American per capita makes more money than any other ethnic group in this country.
Okay, I know. I just want to say we've been huge fans since Talking Drum and Jackie's Bakeaway and all that. Giant, loved your book. My question is, I think the only person that can defeat Hillary Clinton in 2016 is Dr. Ben Carson for obvious reasons. I just want to know what you think.
Well, I mean, he's not a politician.
That's a good
he's
thing.
never been elected to anything, and I like him. I think he's a smart guy, bright guy, but realistically, he's got zero chance of, if he were to run for president, zero chance. I think there's been one president, aside from George Washington, who's never been in elective office before. I can't remember who it was, but it just can't happen in today's world. You don't have enough clout, you don't have enough constituency, you don't owe enough people, you're not going to be able to raise enough money. And what makes you think this guy has a temperament to be a politician? I mean, you give a speech at the Breakfast Club and he's well received, and now all of a sudden people want to draft him for president? Really? I mean, great guy to put on as maybe a Surgeon General or something, but I just think that the person that Fred was talking about, the next guy, is there. We just don't know who he or she is. Ronald Reagan wasn't Ronald Reagan until he became Ronald Reagan. You know, when Ronald Reagan got elected, half the country was like, what? He's going to do what? And, you know, he was considered to be this doddering 69-year-old, oldest person ever to be elected president of the United States, an actor from California who wasn't even in office anymore. No one thought Ronald Reagan would be Ronald Reagan, except maybe Nancy.
Hi, Larry, a large fan. How can the GOP get right-of-center candidates, and what is ineffective in trying to get that done? Well,
There's a lot of hope. Here in California, in the Central Valley, a state senator got elected, white guy in a district that was 70% Hispanic, against somebody who outspent him 2-1. How did he win? He won by going into their home, sitting there, he happens to speak Spanish fluently, and talking to them about economics and about this high-speed train that these people want to build through your land, and about all of the environmental zealots that are taking money out of your wallet, and he ended up winning that district. There were 2 lawmakers in Colorado who got recalled because of their vote on gun control. And as gloomy as it seems at the top, understand, of the 50 states, 30 of them are controlled by Republican governors. The Republicans control the state houses in the majority of our states. And you look at a city like Detroit, that is an object lesson for people. And I also think this. Am I about to ready to drop something here? I also think this. I have a friend who voted for Obama. It shocked me because I thought of him as a black conservative. And I said, why? And he said, because I think that Obama is going to inspire black people to work harder. And he thinks that Michelle and Barack and his Sasha and Malia make a good image for the black family. I said, I agree with all of that. But look at the damage that will be done by having elected the most left-wing guy. God forbid he should get reelected. And this is what we're going to have. I said, the only reason I can think of, cynically, that I would want somebody like Obama to be elected is he's going to screw everything up so much that maybe even left-wing people will go, that crap doesn't work. And look where we are now. We have 7.5% unemployment. When Obama came into office, his economic team did a whole analysis and said, if we don't do anything, unemployment would be 5% today, if we don't do anything. I'm going to save or create 3.5 million jobs. There'll be 1 million electric cars on the road by now. We're going to have 4% GDP was their projection. We've got less than 2%. It is not working. There are millions of people out of work right now. The black unemployment rate is 14%. Emmanuel Cleaver, the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, said, if we had a white person in the office right now, we'd be marching on the place at 14%. Maxine Waters gave a town hall in Detroit. It's on YouTube. And it's about economics. And they were all complaining about not having jobs. And she said, the job unemployment rate is unconscionable. Her word, not mine. If it weren't for the fact that you guys love President Obama so much, we'd criticize him. But until you tell us to criticize him, we won't. We're politicians. We want to get reelected. She said it. So it's not working. Unemployment is high. It is high in the black community. Taxing, spending, regulating doesn't work. My dad said, I never got a job from a poor person. You take money out of a rich person's pocket, there's less money for him or her to buy plant equipment to hire other people. These things are just common sense. And right now they want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Are you kidding me? Last thing. This is height of hypocrisy. In my first book, The 10 Things You Can't Say in America, I write about Acorn. This is before Acorn got defrocked. Acorn came to California to campaign to hike the minimum wage out here. They filed a petition with the court to exempt them from California minimum wage requirements because they said for every minimum wage worker, we'll be able to hire fewer outreach workers.